rebel force has penetrated the shield and landed on Endor.
This is where the fun begins.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
This is Rebel Force Radio.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars news and commentary.
With Jason Swank and Jimmy Mack.
I've seen Star Wars 500 times. Star Wars #1!
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Now it's time for Rebel Force Radio.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Well, I hope you're having as much fun as we are these days with Andor Season 2. It's incredible to have that much new Star Wars to talk about every week. You know, as Star Wars podcasters, I know we've both been asked the question, what do you talk about every week? What do you find to talk about? Well, they're not saying that now, I can tell you that. No, not with 2.5 hours of new Star Wars stories coming out. And then last week, not only did you have Andor, you had Tales of the Underworld that dropped on May the 4th. So we're finally going to get to that this week. We'll tell you all about what we thought of Tales of the Underworld, the Asajj Ventress story, and the Cad Bane story. Plus, of course, it's Andor. That's what everybody's talking about. We're talking about it here on Rebel Force Radio, the weekly podcast. We've got highlights from the writer of the third block, episode 7, 8, 9, the brother of Tony Gilroy, the showrunner, Dan Gilroy. And I'm just going to tell you, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between the voices. So if you're watching the full show video, well, just so to make it easy for you, we'll have a picture of Dan Gilroy up on the screen so you don't confuse the two, because dang, do those Gilroy boys sound a lot alike. So plus that, and hopefully we'll get to some Star Wars and pop culture and a lot more here this week on RFR. Thank you all so much for hanging with us. Do hope that you're taking time out to listen to the Andor after shows, and if you're able to join us live on YouTube, we really appreciate that. We have a lot of fun, but we know that it's a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift to get through all 2.5 hours in less than 24 hours between the premiere of the Andor episodes and our after shows. So don't worry if you can't join us live. It's fine. It's there for when you are ready. So if you're new to the program and introductions may be in order, my name is Jason, and with me, as always, my good friend and yours from Chicago, Jimmy Mack.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Star Wars fans. Back for more Star Wars discussion. After our 3.5 hour breakdown of Andor episodes 7 through 9, I'd say it was exhausted. Just an exhaustive review of that show. But believe it or not, I wasn't exhausted myself. And after the show had ended last night, I started combing through the Andor episode, just looking for sound drops and other sounds and things like that. And I got to the one moment in the arc when Drina is on the radio and she's making that plea for help.
Oh, yeah.
On behalf of the people of Ghorman. And you mentioned it in the after show, albeit kind of briefly. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned that it had an impact on you as a viewer.
Yeah, it really did. Yeah.
You know, it really added to the tension and the drama and the horrific circumstance that was going on right there. As the camera kind of panned across different people in the galaxy, you get a close-up of Cassian. There's a tear coming out of his eye. There's all sort of things going on in the wake of this Ghorman massacre. But I felt like Drina's radio broadcast got really buried in the mix.
At times it really did. You're right.
It really did. There was music. There was sound effects. There was Cassian sniffling because, you know, that tear was coming down his cheek.
Yeah.
So he kind of had the sniffles along with it, maybe. So I took the Drina radio broadcast into the RFR Sound Lab and tried to clean it up, remove all of those sounds, the music, the explosions, the people talking in the background, all that stuff, because the radio broadcast was really coming in and out of the mix, and I was struggling trying to hear it. I was able to pick up a lot of it via subtitles, but still, who wants to be reading when you're supposed to be listening? So I took this piece of audio into the Sound Lab, totally cleaned it up, just for my own listening enjoyment. But I thought, wow, I should play this for Jason this week, and so all of our RFR listeners can hear it. This is just the audio of the vocal of Drina making that plea, and you can hear everything very clearly. Just the feeling I had in my studio late night last night, listening to this piece of audio, just kind of gave me the chills a little bit. Maybe it's just sort of sit still and listen. So that's the kind of effect I hope is not lost on our listening audience. I hope you feel it. I hope they feel it. And I hope I feel it again. So let's hear this piece of audio from Andor Season 2.
This is Pommel 1. We are under siege. We're being slaughtered. The imperial murder of Ghorman has begun. There are hundreds of bodies this moment. As I say these words, hundreds of murdered Ghorman lay dead in Pommel Plaza. Thousands more on the streets, more every minute. We're being destroyed. This is Ghorman reaching for any open channel that can hear me. If you can hear me, if you believe in truth, if you have any faith left in truth, please mark this message and pass it forward. This is murder. The Empire built this fire. They made this fire and led us to the slaughter. Now they expect us to die without knowing why. The conspiracy we feared is real. It's here today. Imperial ships are already landing across the sea. Help us! Is there no one who can help us? Is there no one?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How'd you like to be tuning up and down the dial looking for Led Zeppelin and you stumble across that? Wait a second, what? I think because I am such a fan of the medium of radio, I think that's one of the reasons why it sort of had an impact on me, because I've seen other examples in different movies where communications are being disrupted by some sort of tyrannical force, and there's one person that can get a signal out. You know, it's like, if you can hear me, if you're within the sound of my voice, there is still hope. They even do it in Harry Potter, and that's in a magical world when after Voldemort is completely taken over. And I've seen it in various war movies and things like that, or post-apocalyptic movies. So yeah, it's very effective and sort of chilling when all you hear is the frantic voice versus saying a hologram or something that you might expect to see in Star Wars. So just having the human voice crackling, I thought it was very, very effective. And I'm sure that message got out there and made a lot of people alerted to what was going on. But any efforts to widely broadcast something like that obviously would be shut down by the Empire immediately. Right. But they got their hands full. They came and shut down the communications coming out of that Senate rotunda. So, there's a lot of people at work. We didn't talk about that. I don't recall if we did, about the people who were giving that Imperial officer a hard time about getting access into that equipment closet so he could shut things down. Because one of them was a Lobot. So yes. I was just thrilled with that. Their tech guy, of course, is a Lobot. And they made everything very difficult. And, so it's just so bureaucratic in the way they were responding to the guy, too.
Right. They were cool as cucumbers talking about, the protocol here, the protocol there, and the key went here, the key went there. Yeah, I've got a photo of these two. And they did a splendid job. Yeah, there's a mech. Is that what they call it? What's the term for the Lobots? They're not mechs. They're
that could be. He could be a mod.
A mod. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
But to me, he's just a Lobot.
Just a Lobot. Yeah.
Well, anyone who has a bald head and that thing wrapped around ear to ear on the back of their heads, it's.
No, I was thinking too of the Skeleton Crew Lobot girl. The Lobot from Skeleton Crew.
Yeah, she was a Lobot. She was a Lobot.
She was almost an Obot. They got that right. They got that battery changed, so
that was me late night in the RFR Sound Lab. Like, as if I couldn't have had enough Andor. after 2.5 hours viewing twice, so that's 5 hours, plus 3.5 hours discussing it with you on the after show. So now we're at 8.5 hours. And then, sitting around last night, just combing through the episode, pulling sounds and doing radio production stuff with those sounds. It's like I can't get enough.
Yeah.
So
we've been so caught up in the story because the story is so meaty and dense. We haven't talked really about the music. We haven't really talked about the sound design, the production design, things like that. I will say this. It certainly looks like Star Wars to me. It looks incredibly cinematic. I can't say, Jim, that the music is jumping out at me. All I can say is I don't notice it. It's not taking anything away. The only time I noticed the music is like in the end credits when they were playing the opera song that was being sung in Ghorman, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, really? That was in Ghorman.
In Ghorman, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if they translated the song or wrote a song, but it was in Ghorman. So that, obviously, that's not something you typically hear in Star Wars, is a song with any kind of singing or lyrics too much, especially in an end credits. So, but as far as the score, I have to say it's capable, but nothing's just jumping out at me and saying, oh, wow, this is really epic, or, oh, this beautiful suite that plays every time Mon shows up, or Luthen's theme. There is a Cassian theme, but that's the only theme I know of that has emerged from Andor as a score.
I could kind of hear it in my head myself. Well, it's a new composer this year. So they're leaning on some of those older themes that were produced for the first season. But yeah, it's more of an atmospheric kind of soundtrack. That's the approach they take to this. There's no time to establish actual character themes or anything because there's a lot of quick cutting in the editing. I mean, almost to where it exhausts you as a viewer. Partially part of the reason why I really liked that Episode 8 Ghorman Massacre episode, because it was all based on Ghorman. There were no crisscrossing to other planets and other storylines. It was all Ghorman, the entire episode. I think that's the first episode of season 2 that's been like that.
This is going to sound terrible, but one of the reasons why I liked that episode was it was a break from dialogue where they were just showing you scenes of the massacre. It gave your brain a chance to kind of rest and soak in the moment, because it is so thick with dialogue, which I love it. It's rich. These are some of the best writers around that are giving us incredible Star Wars narrative. But you're right. It's sometimes you just like, can I come up for air? I need a break from this.
Yeah. And the show doesn't really allow for that most of the time. So there's no room to establish these flourishes of music or anything, or even to give the music a purpose outside of just applying that atmospheric vibe to everything. And that's fine. But I mean, I'm not going to throw on the Andor soundtrack and jump on a treadmill or anything like that. It's not going to happen. But it's fine. It's fine for the show.
Well, as you were diving deep into the sound mixes, what are your thoughts on that as far as this from a sound design standpoint, how the show matches up with other Star Wars projects?
It's all been pretty good. Sound design in Star Wars often provides a lot of personality to what's going on. And Andor, of course, doesn't lean on it like that. Andor has a very different personality in general compared to all other Star Wars. So you get the things you expect, like the psh when the door opens, the blaster bolts, things like that. And Andor's really big on, pushing buttons on computer monitors and things like that and making those noises and stuff. But the lack of droids, even the emo droid that they left on the farm. They left him on the farm planet.
They sure did.
I don't think he's. I think he's now a relic of Cassian's past, and no Brasso, no Cassian, no Marva. I feel bad for old B2, but he did meet some kids that he could play tag with.
He might have stayed with that farmer and his family.
Right. The one that we thought had stabbed those guys in the back and turned them in. Yeah,
but
Kelly,
I've since thought about that a little bit more and read some comments, and I'm not so sure that's how it went down. You could read the scene as though Brasso was doing this as a way to deflect, and so I could see
trying to make it seem like trying to make it seem like that guy didn't know he wasn't in on their insurrection, and
he was protecting him potentially.
That. But I don't know. I think they shared a look between the two of them when the troopers were beating down on Brasso, and he looked at that guy, and you're supposed to interpret all this stuff over this look that they give each other.
Right.
But I don't know. I'm still kind of 50-50 on the whole thing.
I could definitely go either way. But as far as B2 is concerned, for his sake, I do hope that the farmer wasn't a dirty traitor, and B2 is spending his days helping out this rough and tumble family of farmers. I like that.
Out on the farm.
Yeah.
Out on the farm.
All right, well, let's continue the Andor talk and check in with you, Rebel Force Radio listeners, and see what is on your mind.
You must contact me.
Play back the entire message.
What message?
Message after the message.
The Emperor commands you to make contact with him. It's a trick. Send no reply.
Shut, Jason and Jimmy. This is Patreon member Fletcher from Maryland. And I had a question that I thought might just be some interesting discussion to bring up on the show, if you all wish to do so. I've been thinking more about Mon Mothma's speech in the last Andor episode and how she just so directly calls out Emperor Palpatine at the very end. And actually kind of got me wondering, how much do Mon Mothma and Bail Organa know about just how evil and horrible Palpatine really is? We know that Bail was helping out Yoda and Obi-Wan there in Revenge of the Sith. Is it possible that they might have looped him in on the fact that you're not just dealing with this evil emperor, he's actually a Sith Lord? And if so, would he have passed that information on to Mon? In other words, she knows that she's poking this massive bear, but does she know just how evil that bear really is and just how deep that risk might go? Anyway, thought that might be interesting to talk about. Thanks for all you guys do, and I hope you have a great week.
That's a great question, Fletcher. That's a really cool question. That's something I hadn't really thought about until Fletcher just brought it up. I'll just give you my quick take on this is I definitely believe that Bail Organa knows. He's just spent too much time with both Yoda and, of course, we know Obi-Wan to not know. And I do think that, as we were talking in the after show, that of all the people in Mon's orbit, the one she probably trusts the most is Bail. That's what it seems like as far as these episodes played out. So there is a bond, there is trust there. And I don't think there's ever really been a time. I mean, this goes back to Revenge of the Sith and the cutscenes with Mon Mothma as they were laying the groundwork for rebellion. She was never a fan of the Palps. Once he became the emperor of the universe. So, and she's there with Bail. I think she does know. I do think she knows. I'll say Bail for sure knows. Mon, I could also see Mon reacting in this sort of, I can't believe that. No, I won't believe it. Maybe that kind of reaction she may have had. But after seeing these atrocities and watching how quickly democracy goes down the drain, it might start to click and make more sense for her. So I think it's very plausible that she knows. I don't know how much she's accepted of that truth, but I think Bail is all in. He's also protecting the child from the Sith. So I think they've had to have let him know.
So there's this book, Mask of Fear, Reign of the Empire, that came out just a few months ago. And it's about what happens to Mon Mothma and Bail Organa after Palpatine declares the Republic is gone and it's now an empire. And it deals a lot with them having to have these covert meetings and just sort of work on, outside of the guise of the empire. And of course, Mon gets, they both get detained and held and interviewed and harassed and all of this stuff. But I don't ever recall Bail actually saying anything to Mon in that novel. It's a trilogy, this Reign of the Empire. It's a trilogy. The first book is The Mask of Fear. And I don't recall, any conversations about Palpatine being a Sith Lord or corrupted by evil dark magic or anything like that. But, you know what Bail Organa knows. He was there at the temple and saw that kid get shot by the stormtroopers. But, I mean, that doesn't mean anything because the Jedi have been declared enemy number one by the Empire anyway. And the public at large is mostly convinced, it's a good idea. Get rid of those Jedi. What are they good for? They took us into a war and they did all this stuff. I mean, that's how it gets presented to the public and why it's easy for Palpatine to execute Order 66. But Bail, certainly would have to know what's going on because he had Yoda and Obi-Wan in his ship and they had to have filled him in. Listen, man, this is not just some politician, senator from Naboo. This guy is an evil Sith Lord and he has some badass force powers and we can't mess with him. Look what he's done. Look at poor Yoda there. He's a mess. And he lost his cloak, too. And he's never getting that one back. That was his favorite cloak. So, there's a lot to answer for Palpatine suddenly being strong enough to defeat Jedi and go toe-to-toe with a guy like Yoda and all of that. So I think Bail does eventually tell Mon, and I'm just wondering if in this series of books, this Reign of the Empire, it's called Mask of Fear, Reign of the Empire, or is it called Reign of the Empire, Mask of Fear? I don't know. I don't know what the trilogy's called, but the book wasn't that great. It was okay, but it dealt in broad strokes and didn't really tell a story. It was more about just Mon and Bail kind of going through harassment from the new empire. And then it featured a spotlight on some side characters that don't matter to anybody or anything. It's like, I hate when books do that.
Well,
Star Wars books do that.
So here's where my head goes, Jim. Let's say that Mon doesn't know. What would be the reason? What would be the motivation behind Bail not telling her? Is there danger in her knowing? Is there danger in her not knowing? Is there an advantage to her knowing? I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be great if all of this stuff gets settled next week on Andor. And there's a scene with Bail and Mon on at the Yavin base. And that's when Bail reveals to her, we have a plan B, though. There's a Jedi hiding out there. Ooh. And when we're ready, he will make himself available to us.
You just gave me goosebumps. You literally just gave me goosebumps. I
keep thinking about that brief scene between Mon and Bail in Rogue One when she says, hey, that Jedi friend of yours, now's the time. Let's go. And he says, I'm going to send someone I can trust to go pick him up. And that person is Leia.
Right.
So Mon knows prior to the events of Rogue One that Bail is aware of a Jedi in hiding that he can reach out to if necessary.
Okay.
So,
and why would that be important to Mon? Why would, when they have all of this. Yeah, I mean, they're still a ragtag group of rebels, but they've got ships, they've got artillery, they have all this stuff.
Yeah.
Why would Mon feel that was an advantage unless she knew that not only are they fighting a war against machinery and soldiers, but they're also fighting a war against evil?
And I don't think it's a secret that Darth Vader is a Sith Lord. I think he goes out there and says it loud and says it proud anytime he makes an appearance.
They all call him Lord Vader. Even Leia calls him Lord Vader.
Yeah. I don't think
I'm sorry.
necessarily...
We're going to get corrected. She does not. She says, Darth Vader, only you could be so bold.
Oh, right.
Yes. I thought she called him Lord Vader.
They do call him Lord Vader.
The Imperials do. I'm trying to think of the case of where a rebel or a good guy calls him Lord Vader.
I don't know. I don't think there's ever any confrontation like that.
Right.
Maybe, does Lando call him that? Lord Vader.
Yes.
I think Lando made it. Maybe
he
Lando
does.
does.
Yes. He
so it's just a
does.
formality. It's a formality that might not necessarily mean they're saying Sith Lord Vader. They're just calling him Lord because that's just like a Star Wars formality you do with guys like Darth Vader, who have
like
sort of
Lady
this
Ventress that we're going to be talking about. There's there's
Lord and Lady. Yes. Because he doesn't have any real military rank, but he only answers to the Emperor of the Galaxy. So
you're right. That's something that's kind of interesting. I never thought of before. He's not General Vader.
No,
he's above
not
all
like
of
Colonel
that.
Vader.
Yeah,
Colonel Vader.
You ever tried his chicken? Oh.
So I think Mon will eventually learn.
Boy,
And
I would
hope we
love
see
it if it
next
was
week.
on screen. That would be awesome.
Because the final trilogy of stories is supposed to take us right up to the beginning of Rogue One. So I would love to see that little one-on-one with Mon and Bail. And I'd also like to see Cassian and Mon have more interaction. But I don't know if that's going to happen. They do hang out in the war room together on Yavin.
They do.
We see that in Rogue
absolutely
One.
Do. And she's very warm to Cassian at the end of this arc. She says, how could I ever repay you?
Yeah,
she's hanging out in that safe house. He saved her life. And it's such a dramatic sequence as he kills the driver, pushes her in the car, and they whisk off together. So, yeah, I would think that a moment like that would really create a bond. So I like to think that a bond was created between the two of them.
Plus, you just witnessed Cassian handle himself in this situation in such an impressive fashion. She really is like just this close to hero worship. I mean, and rightfully so. That's something that Cassian has earned. And that's what puts him on a pedestal in the eyes of all these other rebellion leaders. That's why there's something special about the guy, clearly. And now we're beginning to learn that thing special about him might be the influence of the Force itself.
Yeah.
Which I really enjoy. I like that little inclusion. And we got some clips from Dan Gilroy, who wrote those episodes, coming up here in just a few. And he addresses that, the Force in Andor and stuff like that. So it's cool.
But first, if you have not gotten enough Rebel Force Radio in your life between the Andor after shows and the weekly podcast, you might want to check us out over on Patreon. There's always something brand new and exciting happening in the Rebel Force Radio community at patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio.
Yeah, it's the place you want to be. If you support Rebel Force Radio, you could have access to ad-free shows, bonus podcasts, full show video, and access to an amazing online community of the world's greatest Star Wars fans. And if you're an RFR VIP, you can even have the opportunity to host a show with me. And that show is called RFR Q&A. No new RFR Q&A this week, though. It's RFR RPG with our friend Matt Rashid, Game Master Matt, Tyler Page, and the adventures of Podcastus and Grando the Grand continue. And we're getting places in this game. We're going places. We're getting places. So it's always fun, very exciting, and it's a lot of laughs too along the way with Tyler, me, and Matt. Sure, there's tangents we go on, but that's to be expected at any gaming table. And our gaming table is not immune to all the sort of wacky conversation that RPG gamers have throughout the course of a game. It all happens at RFR on Patreon with RFR RPG. Also this week, the Babu Freaks are back. The Freaks have returned, and we're talking to Barry about all the things he did at Star Wars Celebration Japan. We're talking to Tyler about his adventures at White Sox Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. I was with Tyler. And also Brian is there, and he shares his thoughts on going to see Revenge of the Sith back in the theater again after 20 years. And it's always great to catch up with the Freaks, Chicago area Star Wars fans, friends of mine, and good buddies of everyone here in the RFR fan community. Also, keep in mind, RFR at Rancho Obi-Wan. That's coming at you September 6th. We will let you know when tickets go on sale very soon. I'm targeting the end of this month, so it could be in a matter of weeks, but we'll give you a heads up first of all. And RFR patrons will get first crack at tickets. So if this is something you really want to go to, you might want to join us on the RFR Patreon community and be able to get access to tickets before anyone else. Judging by the feedback and response of the RFR Patreon community, I think there's a possibility they're going to buy all the tickets. So if you want it, I mean, that's a great problem for us to have.
You know, that's pretty good when you sell out on pre-sale.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I'm just hearing a lot of buzz. There's a lot of really strong buzz. So RFR patrons will get the first crack at tickets to see RFR at Rancho Obi-Wan. And also, we might as well remind you that you can join RFR for the Forest Moon Festival, May 30th through June 1st in California's Redwood Forest. So this could be a lot of laughs. It covers a 2-county area. We'll be at a zoo. We'll be at a park. There'll be screenings in the Redwoods where the Ewok village was shot. These are actual shooting locations. Even if you're not in a place that was actually captured on a frame of film in Return of the Jedi, everywhere you go in this area will make you feel like you're in the Endor forest. There's just no getting away from it. The scenery is beautiful. The nature, I can't wait to go there and breathe that fresh air. And I'm looking forward to hopefully running into a lot of RFR listeners out there. We'll be out there. Kyle Newman will be with us. There's going to be a screening of Fanboys going on with the Q&A with Kyle. Me and Jason will be roving around all over the place, doing interviews, talking to fans and friends of the show. It's going to be a great time. More info on that at forestmoonfestival.org, org.org. But Patreon's the place you want to go for ad-free shows, bonus podcasts, full show video, and, like I said, an amazing online community of the world's greatest Star Wars fans. Patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio, Patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio.
All right, look. There's only one return, okay? And it ain't of the king, it's of the Jedi.
Rebel Force Radio.
I have good news for you, my lord.
That's good news.
Come closer, I have good news.
Boy, I tell you, these episodes of the Q&A podcast have been fantastic. It seems like within hours of a new Andor Season 2 block of episodes dropping, there you got the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith, and he's talking to guys like Tony Gilroy, Bo Willimon, and now this week with episodes 7, 8, and 9, Dan Gilroy, the brother of Tony Gilroy. And there's 3 Gilroys, by the way. There's a John, right? There's a Tony, there's a Dan, and a John.
Their father was a very acclaimed playwright who had won Tonys and even a Pulitzer Prize. So they come from... Yeah, they come from amazing stock when it comes to screenwriting, and the Gilroy boys have it. Dan Gilroy also is a funny point of trivia, is married to actress Renee Russo.
Oh, he did pretty well for himself.
Cool little trivia tidbit on Dan, and he's a workaholic. He says he gets up every morning at 4:15. By 4:45, he's typing, and he sits there at that desk writing until 6:30 at night, and he does it every day, is what he says.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I like.
You thought I was a workaholic, so
yeah. I like when he said that even when he's working out, or when he's in between paid writing gigs, he's writing spec scripts. So he's never not
always
writing. Yeah. Always.
He says he loves doing it.
Right.
He loves doing it. And it seems like he's also his own harshest critic and never satisfied. And so we kind of avoid a lot of that that shop talk that goes on here on Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith. Because, Jeff's an industry guy, and sometimes it does tend to get a little bit insider talk where they really start getting into the nuts and bolts of the process and everything. And we're more interested in the story around here and the characters. And Dan, much like his brother Tony, has very solid thoughts about the situations and the characters we see in Andor. And like Jason said, he sounds exactly like Tony Gilroy. So, I mean, they're carbon copy as far as their voices go. Maybe Dan talks just a slight bit quicker. He's a fast talker, Dan Gilroy.
Real fast.
He's a fast talker. I had the playback speed on the podcast at 1.25. So it was going, 25% faster. And I had to put it back down to normal because Dan was talking too fast. The way I sped up the playback, it was too fast for Dan. So maybe, Dan, I should have slowed it down. But he talks about these episodes, 7 through 9, the episodes from this week that we just watched. And we know there was a lot of things happening. And one of those things that happened was Bix took Cassian over to the Yavin Temple to go meet a Force healer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking on the after show about how we probably have never seen a Force healer until on screen until The Rise of Skywalker. But somebody reminded me that Baby Yoda healed Din in the week prior to the Rise of Skywalker.
After he had the battle with the that beast.
Yes.
So Baby Yoda was really the first on-screen Force healing that we saw. And that was very special. We later saw it with Rey, and then it became kind of a thing.
Now it's a thing.
It's a thing.
Yeah. It really didn't arrive on the Star Wars playing field until 2019. Live action. It's been around in books. But live action hasn't been there until 2019. So it's only been around 6 years, and now they're everywhere. Force healers everywhere. There's one outside my house right now. And the people are lining up down the block for the Force healer. But, of course, Cassian was skeptical of it, probably echoing some of Tony Gilroy's personal thoughts, because a lot of people have criticized Tony Gilroy for avoiding some of the more essential Star Wars elements that we're used to getting in every story thus far, from lightsabers to the Force to dark side, light side, all that stuff gets largely ignored by Tony Gilroy, the showrunner. And his brother Dan, however, has a more solid approach to the Force. He understands the essential nature of it when it comes to telling Star Wars stories. So he talks a little bit about that and how the Force was included in this story, why it's included in this story, and what's up with that Force healer.
I think the Force is hugely important to the franchise. I think I've always been a believer that the Force is something that needs to be represented. Tony always had in his head that in season 1 it would not be represented, but he always told us that in season 2 it would come in. Given the fact we don't dive in deep to the Force in season 1, I think it would have been very difficult in season 2 to just dive in fully and suddenly it's there and it's present. I think tonally it might have been difficult. So when Tony presented in his original outline how it was going to be broached, the topic, and we all latched onto it, I particularly as a fan of the Force. And I was like, I wanted to push that scene with the Force healer as far as possible. And also what was also critically important to me was that Bix, having witnessed it, became a believer herself. That was really important to me. That Bix, I think at the end, Bix there is something out there that I can't explain that is incredibly powerful, that is guiding a lot of what we're doing. I don't know where Diego lands on this, but when I was writing it, I was imagining that although it was an elliptical sort of introduction to the Force, it had an effect on him. I felt he was open at that point. You know why? And we actually talked about this in the room because we were starting to advocate why it should be in there. And would Diego, would Cassian believe this or not? And we were all going like, so many phenomenally strange occurrences have happened to him. He must be now open to something saying there's an organized principle / element that's behind all this. And I think, I don't know if you've interviewed Diego, I'd actually be curious to know what he would say, but I would think Diego would say at that point, I mean, he's sensing his death. I mean, I think some part of him is sensing this is not going to go well. It's because he's watched too many people go the other way and his mortality is at stake. And he's, so many strange occurrences have happened, running into Cyril and Ghorman and just the strange, like there was that and all these other things.
Yeah, Dan Gilroy, fan of the Force. Yeah, I like that.
Self-proclaimed fan of the Force.
Something that he said about Bix, that he thinks she walks away from this experience as a believer. The lines that they wrote for her indicate that she may have been a believer before this. Because she says, I've had dreams. It's not the first time. I'm not afraid to admit it. And so this is not her first time with feeling these feels. So, but I like that. I like that about her. I like that she's coming into it with those beliefs, but we didn't know it.
I think what Dan is saying is that there was enough Force pulling at Bix to the point where she became curious enough about it to take Cassian to go see one of these people, because she just wants Cassian to heal. Yeah. She's thinking about him. She doesn't want him to be in pain. And a lot of times when people are in pain, they will go to extreme measures to try and find a solution. You always hear people who have diseases or cancer, and they'll get on a plane and fly to some country on the other side of the globe to go meet with some specialist who may have the answer. And I think that's what Bix was trying to provide for Cassian in this case. She was curious about it. But then after having that interaction with the Force healer and feeling what the Force healer herself was feeling, this total stranger, she felt like, oh my God, I have something in common with this mystic who is picking up the same vibes off Cassian I am. And it was just that gut feeling that probably is what made Bix a believer in that moment, per Dan Gilroy. That's what made her the believer. She was curious at first, but her encounter with the Force healer may have sealed the deal. And I think had a strong, strong influence on why Bix left Cassian at the end of the arc.
Dan Gilroy, Force fan. Bix, Force curious. I like it. Yeah. I also like that he calls Cassian Diego. In his mind, he's writing for Diego, and so he's using the names interchangeably. So but it's an interesting question that he asks. Does Cassian ever stop to think about these strange occurrences? And why he always seems to be in, depending on your point of view, the right place at the wrong time or the right place at the right time. And I suspect he does, but I think the difference is that Cassian is a character, because he's been through so much, I don't think he likes to slow down, to stop. I don't think he's comfortable sitting there with idle thoughts. And he doesn't really have much thought for himself. In the earlier episodes, we see him sort of, I guess, on his own mission, being sort of selfish in some ways. He doesn't really check in with Marva. And that adventure that he goes on in the first season and then losing Marva and essentially losing Ferrix, now all of a sudden he wants to, well, his first loss was his sister, but now he wants to save everything. He does not want to slow down. I don't think he wants to be left with his own thoughts. So no, I don't think he necessarily reflects on it. And when it's shoved in his face, like in the scene with Bix and the Force Healer, he's like, no, he wants no part of it.
Yeah, he's just not a very reflective guy. At the beginning, when we meet him, he's rather self-centered. He's busting into these Imperial outposts, stealing their stuff, spitting in their food, and laughing at how arrogant they are, right in their own homes. And if he stopped and thought about it for a second, he might have let himself become intimidated by the Empire, like the rest of the galaxy has become. But Cassian doesn't stop and think that way. He just sees opportunity and he takes it. And I'm not trying to say that he's rash or impulsive. That's just how he operates. He doesn't have time to let his feelings dictate what his actions are going to be. But Bix is the one thing that kind of changes that with Cassian. That's the one thing that does sort of change with him. And he does take time to contemplate his relationship with her, his connection with her, the chemistry they have, and the romance they have. And that's something he wants to protect and maintain for as long as possible. It's becoming a distraction, essentially, to Cassian and taking him off of his, what we are now beginning to understand is sort of a predestined course he's on, according to the ways of the Force. And I think that's incredible. Cassian himself might be tapping into the Force when he says that he's a lucky guy who may have already overplayed his luck. And he knows that the next adventure could very well be his last. Why is he feeling that way? And he's going to start feeling it stronger and stronger as we get closer to the events of Rogue One. But I don't know if he's actually going to be articulating any of those thoughts, because that's something he would only say to Bix. He was saying stuff to Clea about quitting. He was saying that. And she couldn't understand it because of what he had witnessed. But he's burnt out and he wants to settle down and protect Bix and just have a life. But that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Bix is concerned that his destiny has already been chosen, and if she sticks around, she's gonna blow it, not for just themselves, but for the entire galaxy. That's where we're at right now with this whole thing. And, the stakes are getting higher. We know that as they get closer to Rogue One. We know that the closer they get to the completion of the Death Star, that this is something that you can't be passive about. So,
boy, I hadn't considered what you said about if he does stop to slow down and self-reflect, that he might be getting visions or ideas of his own death. Who wants to do that? So as long as he doesn't think about it, it's not happening. And he doesn't want some Force healer coming around giving him creepy vibes about the seeds of his mortality already being planted. He doesn't want that. And who could blame him? I wouldn't want it either.
Right. Yeah. No time for reflection. Just get lost in your work, Cassian, and, keep pulling off the impossible. But, let's talk about Bix leaving Cassian. We discussed that in great detail on the after show, but let's hear what Dan Gilroy has to say about it.
I remember getting to the scene in the bedroom, and I hope the line is still in there. Like he says, finally, there's nothing more important than this. Like, I'm with you. There's nothing more important than this. And she doesn't respond. I hope that's still in there. And then the next day she leaves the tape. As soon as he says that, as I was writing, I thought he sealed his death warrant with this relationship. because Bix does not believe that. Bix believes there is something far more important than the two of them. And so that's the line to me that she decided right there, I have to kill this relationship because I am in the way. It touched on in the writer's room. I don't remember if I really told Tony I was going to do it, but I sent it to Tony. Finally got the draft in. I was late. And Tony was really into it. Tony was like, this is great. And because she leaves the message for him. And I was going like, yeah, because that was not been decided in the writer's room. Actually, in the writer's room, it was going to be like they were going to encounter each other and have a conversation. I was going like, I just can't write that. I just like, it's just too tragic. It's more tragic the other way. I mean, of all the sacrifices in both seasons, Bix's sacrifice to that relationship is fairly high up. I mean, she's killing something that's obviously everything to her. She's doing it for the cause, you know?
But it is much more dramatic and tragic to have Cassian wake up in that bed by himself and find the recording, as opposed to them having split with some argument. Because I can imagine for Dan Gilroy writing this, how do you do it without Cassian fighting for her to stay? And that's
right.
not the type of exit that you want to have for Bix. You want to have it much more poignant and much more peaceful to the extent that you can. Because when he gets the message, he's running out there to see if he can still catch that transport.
The covers in the bed were still warm from her being there. So he thought he still had a chance.
Yeah. So much more dramatic.
And that's heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking too, but without being like so blunt. Like a breakup between the two of them. You know, you could just see them. They're standing outside their treehouse on Yavin. It starts raining, of course. You know, she's crying at him, and he's "Don't, you cannot leave." And she's going, "I have to leave, Cassie, and I have to." Yeah, that'd be exhausting, man. I mean, after all we've been through, it is right. You know, as an audience, it would just be like, golly, we got to put up with all this brutal stuff after all this guy has been through. It's much cleaner to do it with her leaving the Dear John transmission or whatever you want to call it, and off she goes.
And a small detail here, if you listen to the full interview, Dan talks about how efficient, and Tony has talked about how efficient that writing room was, and how efficiently they broke these episodes, and how efficiently they fleshed out the scripts. So for Dan to talk about missing that deadline, because he makes a point later, he says, I only hire workaholics. We don't miss deadlines. But for him to admit that he missed that deadline, that shows you how challenging that script was for him to write. He was not taking it for granted. He was putting a lot of thought into it. And I think it definitely shows.
Yeah, and I don't think he was going to submit anything that he himself wasn't 100% satisfied with.
Right.
So, Dan Gilroy also, his next project's going to be the Miami Vice reboot, which should be Crockett and Tubbs, you know?
Oh, for television?
That should be interesting. I think it's probably a feature film.
Oh.
I'm not sure. Maybe it is a series. I don't know. I don't follow the Miami Vice podcast or anything like that. The
Miami
the MVP, the MVP, the Miami Vice podcast. Come on, you guys. Do I have to do all the marketing for everyone? Hey, so but it's so much better to have her leave that message for him, because I'm just thinking about it. There's no closure to their relationship. They were never able to hug it out and, do any of that. And so I think that's a loose end. That's a ... at the end of that sentence. I really think we are going to see Bix again. I really do. I really do. And I am once again predicting a tragic end for Bix. It hurts me to say that, but I mean, I just have to go with my gut and what the Force is telling me. And that's just something I feel. It's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. So that's the one relationship in Andor, Bix and Cassie. And there is another relationship, another romantic relationship, and that's Cyril and Dedra. And Dan discusses the characters and their backgrounds and what makes them so different. Yet they're a couple, and their differences, I believe, ultimately drive the wedge between the two of them, of course. But let's hear what Dan has to say about that relationship.
You tie Cyril into the relationship with Ventress. So Ventress says point blank to Edie over that horrendous dinner, as she grew up in basically like an orphanage. So I think Tony and I and Bo and Tom, I think we all like to imagine that everything doesn't have to be explained. The audience makes connections. So as soon as Ventress says she grew up under the Empire, she now is one of the henchmen of the Empire, you can sort of connect going, oh, it's kind of like Stockholm Syndrome. She became, and she's a self-loathing, whatever, person. But then we compared that to Cyril, because now we're talking about Cyril. And we were very much in the writer's room going, well, Cyril's not like that at all. What is Cyril? Cyril's ultimately a bureaucrat who wants to please, who got no love. His father was obviously non-existent. Edie never gave him anything resembling affection or positive reinforcement. So what does he want? He wants to pat on the head. When he says after party gas pats him on the head, as the guys say, however, but that's not enough to stop him from making observations about what he sees. And what he sees on Ghorman is, this thing I'm working for is not what I thought I was working for. That's a really interesting character in a world that's becoming autocratic, because there are people who make bargains with authority that's a dangerous authority, and some will stay with it and not have a question, but there will definitely be some who will go, this is much worse or different than I thought it was going to be. I'm having second doubts about this. And I think he's representative of a group of people who get caught up in a system and they don't do it for philosophical reasons. He's not doing, Dedra's doing it for some strange philosophical reason. She believes in the Empire. Cyril has no philosophical belief in it. Cyril has emotional need, which it's sort of supplying, but that does not blind him from seeing things.
Wow. Boy, we should have had him on the after show last night. He could have helped us out a few times. That's a great, I mean, obviously the guy wrote it, so he's going to have an excellent take on those characters. The idea, because I even called Cyril on the podcast multiple times a true believer, because he does seem to give off that vibe that he is a believer in his cause, and that cause is the Empire, because it represents order and standards. I mean, the guy works for the Bureau of Standards, whatever. But I love the way Dan phrases this, is that it satisfies an emotional need. It scratches the emotional itch that he never got from an absent father, from a domineering mother. But in the case of Dedra, she is the true believer because she was literally raised by the Empire. He likens it to Stockholm Syndrome. That's the one thing that I kind of like. I'm not a weird one. On board with that, because it's not like she was kidnapped. She didn't know any different. She grew up. The last thing a fish notices is water. So if you grow up in a totalitarian type environment, that's the last thing you're going to notice. It's going to seem normal to you. And that, as I say that, it kind of describes Dedra. She's very weird, but yet everything seems very normal to her.
Yes, right. Because that's her culture. That's her lifestyle.
Right.
That's the only life she's ever known. Cyril, he has no lifestyle. His mother has done a number on him. So Cyril's out there in the galaxy just looking for a place to fit in, and a place where he could find appreciation and maybe even some accolades. So where does he go first? To Morlana, and fits in there with those corporate cops. And he thinks that he's becoming comfortable and self-confident in his abilities as a cop. He's the cream that rises to the top of the beverage, because the other cops that are surrounding him, they're just going through the paces. They don't care. They're not seeking the fulfillment out of that job that Cyril is seeking. So he's desperate. He's eager, he's ambitious, and he throws everything into it because he has nothing outside. He has this domineering mother, and it doesn't seem like Cyril has many friends outside of the friends that he works with as a cop on Morlana. There was that guy Linus, I think, if I remember correctly, from season 1.
What's his name, Linus?
He is kind of like he's kind of like a husky cop, and he and Cyril seem to be the two peas out of the same pot.
I remember that guy. Yeah, he was kind of a sidekick to Cyril there for a little bit.
Yeah. And even after Cyril had left the Force, Linus would feed him information about Cassian and things like that. I think that was his name, Linus or Linus or whatever. But that's what Syril wants. He just wants to fit in. He's trying to find his place. So he gets booted from the Morlana force because he screwed up the whole Cassian thing and let him get away. And there's dead cops and destruction in the town square. So that's a mess. Then he goes home to his mama and she sets him up with a job working at the Bureau of Standards. And he apparently succeeds to a decent degree, I guess, or he meets Dedra during that riot, saves her. Finally, now he's connecting with someone. That someone he's connecting with is the king of all scowls, this imperial bred ice queen. And he's, this is the love of his life now. That's how low he is sunk. Dedra's an improvement on his mother. Dedra stands up for him in the face of his mother. So he's fitting in a little bit with her, so he thinks. And then he gets these promotions, which he loves. Now he's moving somewhere. He's seen his career go someplace. He presents this information to Partagaz. Partagaz pats him on the head. Good boy, good boy. Syril says that's the best day of my life. I mean, it's this, the guy's an empty shell of a human being, and it doesn't take much to give him a sense of satisfaction because he's never experienced that before. And so the smallest things are the greatest things to a guy like Syril. And then he's involved in this mission, as a result of the greatest day of his life. He's involved in this mission and he's planting information with these rebels. And then he learns that he was being manipulated to manipulate the rebels to create this chaos in the streets and justify the Imperial hammer coming down on the people of Ghorman. And when that all becomes clear to him, he realizes he's been used. He's just a tool. He's just a cog in the machine. And he confronts Dedra on that, and she tries to soothe him by saying, we're going to go home as heroes, you and me. But he's already lost his mind because the acceptance he thought he was getting from Dedra was phony and fake. And that's devastating to a guy like Syril. Like I said, the smallest things are the biggest things to a guy like Syril because he's an empty shell. And that's the result of Edie's mom of the century homemaking. But that's the sad truth of it all and why he loses it and completely abandons her. He tries to fit in with those Ghorman rebels. That's something I've been thinking about. And you brought this up on the after show, and I wasn't so sure about this. I thought Syril was still trying to play them, but I think he was angling for a little bit of acceptance from them. I really felt that when he had his discussion with Rylance, he says, well, like, what kind of person are you? He's like, and it came crashing down on Syril at that moment, and he found himself standing in the middle of the square with all this mayhem going on around him, all these protesters, and he looks over to his left, and who's there? It's Cassian Andor. Holy smokes. I really need a punching bag right now, and I think I see it, thinks old Syril. So,
hey, my luck is turning around. Here's the guy I've been trying to find for the last several years.
Yes. I've been cultivating a lot of energy for this moment. And let's just say it's only intensified in the last 24 hours. So let's go. So he fights with Cassian, and Gilroy talks about that.
I think when he sees Cassian, it's this primal, animalistic, this was my goal. This is what I was going for. And as we were working on it, I was thinking that he might have been imagining at that moment, if I get this guy, Dedra's going to be proud of me. And this was the guy this was going to be a really big thing. And I thought maybe this was going to be a reward for Dedra because it's such a shift all of a sudden from like, wow, I'm kind of like upset with what they put me through and maybe what's going on in Ghorman is wrong to now I'm just going to fucking kill this guy. I just thought it became an instinctual thing. But, in a fight, sometimes experience wins the day, but other times rage. Cyril's a man on fire at that point. He's blowing himself up emotionally. He just, people who are emotionally charged, try to stop them, no matter what your experience is. It's impossible. I was very intrigued as we were going through it, going, God, so why? He's going to be killed right when he's sort of waking up a little bit here. I always imagined, where would he be if he hadn't been killed? And I sort of thought that he might have become a rebel.
There it is. There it is. I do wish that Goldsmith would have followed up on that, and maybe he did. the one thing I'll say about the podcast is it's very edited. And so sometimes I get frustrated. It's great stuff, but I go, oh, I wish you would have asked a follow-up here. And it could also be that he doesn't have as much time with these guys. These are busy guys. But I would have wanted to hear a follow-up because I've run the tape back multiple times, and there's a moment as he's holding the blaster to Cassian, and he's going to blow Cassian away. There's a look of resignation that comes over his face, and the blaster just starts to dip a bit, and that's when the bullet hits his head. So when he talks about him maybe becoming a rebel, I'm not saying that was definitely going to be the moment, but it was a moment where I think he realized, why am I fighting this guy? This guy and I might actually be on the same side.
I still see that scene as Cyril being completely dumbfounded by the fact that Cassian didn't know who he was. And it was the final salt in the wound of that guy's life was, here's this guy. I've set my marks on him. I've been chasing him for a number of years now. We have had encounters in the past, and he doesn't know who I am. I'm a nobody.
Yeah, there hasn't been a day to go by that a day hasn't gone by that Cyril hasn't thought about Cassian Andor. And to find out that Cassian Andor not only doesn't think of him every day, doesn't even know who he is.
Right. That's the impact Cyril makes on people, and I think that reality really came crashing around him very hard and harshly in that 2 seconds he had to think about it. And I think the blaster may have been going down because I think Cyril was about ready to verbally destroy Cassian before he, physically destroys him. Yeah, I think he was going to, have some final words to say to Cassian before he put Cassian away for good. That was the vibe I picked up on it.
Yeah, I could definitely read it that way as well. I would have loved to have heard that speech. The Gilroys write great monologues. Yeah. I'd have loved to have heard the what for he would have given Cassian.
Yeah, but the show is anything but predictable, and that's kind of its style. When it gets to those moments, some people might say it's tropey that Cyril got shot in the head before he can do any permanent damage to Cassian. Cassian's skin gets saved right at the last minute. The hero gets saved at the last minute by a factor you weren't even considering in this one-on-one brawl. Was another guy coming to the door and shooting Cyril in the head. Nobody sees that coming. There was no setup for it whatsoever. We'd even know that guy was around. Rylands.
I was just listening to a story. They were talking about Vietnam veterans, and they were interviewing these. And the Vietnam vets are all really getting up in years. They're like the World War II vets when I was a kid. When I was a kid growing up. They were the grandparents, and but they were talking to these guys, and they were talking about how stressful it was, and how every day you'd get up and you didn't know if you were going to live to fight another day. And so many of them said, well, I just knew that I was going to survive this. I was not going to die. It never occurred to me that I was going to die. And then the person interviewing them said, well, how many people died that got up every day thinking that they weren't going to die? And it made me think about Cassian Andor and the idea of him being touched, him being special. Did Cassian think that any day, any moment, his number could be up? Or did Cassian have this sense that he was destined for something special, or that he hadn't reached the end point? Like the healer says, other people are sort of the dialogue was really good. I'm trying to remember this, but essentially other people become the objects of the past that they accumulate. Whereas Cassian is collecting things for a greater purpose. That's how I interpret it. I'm paraphrasing. So Cassian has a completely different, even if he doesn't consciously realize it, subconsciously, he is always working towards a goal. He is gathering allies, he's gathering materials, he's gathering knowledge, he's gathering experience, all of that culminates into this moment that we see at the end of Rogue One, because he's the one that secures the plans and hands them off. So it is definitely for a larger purpose. But when Cyril is standing there and pointing that gun at him, it's just, I wonder if he thought for a second, this is it, my number's up. Or does he always know that somehow, some way, his skin's going to get saved? Do you just get used to that?
There's a lot of stuff flying around that plaza there that day. It was a very extreme situation, probably the most extreme situation Cyril had ever found himself in. So, it was he. I think in those moments, Cyril was dealing more with these very primal emotions, and was just like, as the saying goes, seeing red.
Oh,
I don't think there was any time.
Gilroy's talking about blind rage. That's really what he was
blind rage.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
More with Andor writer Dan Gilroy, who recalls that when they were developing the Andor show, I think there were other producers, other writers working on it before Tony Gilroy actually was brought on board. And Tony Gilroy and Dan Gilroy, all the Gilroys. Before they were brought on board for the actual series, they were developing Andor as a show that featured, basically, according to what Tony Gilroy has said, it was an adventure of the week with Cassian and K2SO going out on these adventures, and it just came off as hollow and lame to a guy like Tony Gilroy, who saw a significant potential for telling really serious, gripping drama with Star Wars. And he retooled their entire idea and made it into something of his own. But that doesn't mean leaving K2SO on the sidelines for the entire series. The way that he looks at it is that these are stories all leading up to Rogue One. So naturally, you have to have Cassian and K2SO cross paths before we get to Rogue One. So they created the scenario at the end of this arc where Cassian acquires K2SO and they power him up and everything. And you get some of that K2SO humor. It was just humor. I don't appreciate, what do you say? I don't appreciate that gun being pointed at me or something like that. I'm sorry if I offended you.
Yes.
It's like, dude, you just woke up. You were non-existent 30 seconds ago. But it was that kind of humor I don't think that Tony Gilroy really felt would be appropriate, running throughout all of Cassian's story as it all gets amped up toward the beginning of Rogue One. And so Dan Gilroy talks about writing the scene in which K2SO gets introduced here on Andor. And I think he also talks about some of the alternate ideas they may have had or different approaches. So let's hear what Dan has to say.
In the writer's room, we had actually a different concept of introducing. We actually thought that K2 was so important, we were going to introduce him almost on an episode by himself. Actually, we tried it. I actually wrote an episode where K2 was introduced. Cassian needed to get back to Yavin. It was getting more difficult to get into Yavin because they were tightening the shipping lanes. And he had to hitch a ride on a rebel sort of favored freighter. We had a whole episode that we tried where Cassian's on the freighter and some other things. And then K2 comes aboard to do a search and it becomes this sort of nightmarish, almost alien sort of like thing. It was a very cool episode. It didn't work. It was too different from the other episodes. It was a standalone. It was wildly expensive. So it became, Tony called up and said, dude, that episode's not going to work. It's like for these reasons. And I said, yeah, I totally understand that. I think I had a sense maybe it wasn't going to work while we were talking about it. He started then to explore he would call me up and go, "What if we tried this?" And he was the one who came up with the idea of the way it is now at Ghorman with getting hit by the vehicle and bringing it on. In terms of the mechanics, it's a pretty big vehicle. K2s are not immortal. We always knew that when it woke up, there was going to be a moment of, oh my God, like, is it going to kill us all? And that's the birth of the funny K2. That was the birth of the weird, non sequitur, odd K2, which we all love.
Yeah. So that personality is there from the moment the eyes flash, and there he is. I do recall hearing Tony talking about keeping K2 on the ship and sidelining him quite a bit because he sort of took away from some of the more dramatic moments. And I don't want to say that he wasn't his favorite character, but for a guy like Tony Gilroy, I don't know how much he relishes having the old comic relief sidekick. But I think that's something he inherited from the film as it was that Gareth Edwards had put together.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess if you're a writer and you have K2 in a scene, he'll start stealing the scene no matter what it is. He becomes a focal point instantly. So that makes a lot of sense, to regulate the amount of K2SO you have. I could just imagine in the writer's room, Tony just pounds the table, gets up. All right, that's enough. You've had enough K2SO. Let's put him back on the ship. He's a scene stealer. We can't get across any solid drama with K2SO walking around in the background. It's just not going to happen. Well, I don't know. The K2SO we met in Rogue One is comic relief a lot of times. But the K2 droids we see in Andor are just devastatingly dangerous and threatening and scary. Just
they are
scary. The way that Enza suffered her fate at the hands of a K2 droid who just grabbed her and threw her as she's crawling to get to her blaster. God, who doesn't have nightmares like that? When there's something threatening approaching you and for some reason you can't run. You're crawling maybe. Do you ever have those dreams where you can't run? I've had them. I don't know what that means.
I have had dreams where I can't walk.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, why can't I move my legs? What is going on? And I'm not always in danger, but it really starts to freak me out where everything is just very labored, almost like I'm the Tin Man and I'm starting to rust. Very, very strange. But yeah, it's a claustrophobic feeling for sure. But I just remembered that it's a K2 droid that arrests Cassian on that Myrtle Beach planet in season 1, right? So yeah, because they come in and they're busting up something, and Cassian's there, and he doesn't have the right paperwork or something, and gets.
It doesn't even matter. Paperwork, it doesn't even matter. They think he's part of their gang. They just don't like how he looks. He said, "Hang." Remember, he's holding him up against the wall. He said, "Hang."
Yeah.
And that
I remember thinking then that was going to be the K2 origin. That somehow was the droid that would become K2.
And of course, a lot of people were speculating that B2 was going to be have his computer mind downloaded into K2SO. And
I hadn't thought of that.
K2 we actually see is
a cool theory.
But no, K2 stands on his own. He's an individual. He's a one of a kind. No B2 influence going on there. So that's Dan Gilroy. I suggest everyone to go check out the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith, not to be confused with RFR Q&A, found exclusively on Patreon. But Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith. The past 3 shows have been very Andor intensive. This week he had Dan Gilroy. Last week he had Beau Willimon. And the week previous to that, he had Tony Gilroy himself on the show. We played highlights from that. And so maybe on the next weekly RFR, we'll feature some Beau Willimon and whoever else might be appearing on the interview circuits talking about Andor. We're looking at everything. We're combing the internet to find the highlights of all of these great interviews and So we all have some insider information about Andor Season 2, which I think is very valuable, especially as we're going into the final week already, the final week. So next week will be only the Andor after show here on RFR. Wednesday night, it'll be live streamed, and then the podcast will drop after that. Then no weekly RFR next week. The following week, the weekly RFR will return. And then the week after that, we're going to the Force Moon Festival. So got it all mapped out.
Yes, it's going to be a busy May here at Rebel Force Radio. All right, let's talk a little bit about Tales of the Underworld. It dropped for the general public, it dropped on Sunday, May the 4th. Now, there is a collab going on between Star Wars and the Fortnite gaming franchise. And my son is a Fortnite player, and he's been having a lot of fun with the Star Wars collab, the various skins and some of the new weapons and powers. And we found out that you could watch, this was on Saturday, that you could watch the first 2 episodes of Tales of the Underworld in the Fortnite game. And we did. Your character goes into a little movie theater and boom, it comes up full screen. So I did watch the first couple of episodes that way. And then, man, it was fun waking up Sunday morning and being able to sit there with your coffee and your bagel, or maybe you had some sugary cereal, and watch new Star Wars. It was really great. It gave me that Saturday morning feel, even though it was a Sunday morning. Still gave me the feel. So Tales of the Underworld, written, all of the episodes, I believe, written by Matt Miknevitz. Various directors coming in for the various episodes. There's similar cast of directors that we had for Bad Batch and Rebels. But it opens up with these 3 episodes focused on Asajj Ventress. And Jim, I had really high hopes when this episode started. It was an incredibly cool sequence at the very beginning with Quinlan Vos bringing the wrapped body of a dead Asajj Ventress to lay her down in the waters of Dathomir with Obi-Wan right behind him. And I thought, oh, wow, man, this is going to be really, really cool. And you get Mother Talzin in that classic fairy tale where you have to sacrifice in order to something very, very special in order to gain new life. It's been in many, many fairy tales. Like you think about The Little Mermaid, where she had to give up her voice to have a new life as a human being. There's always some sort of sacrifice. In the case of Asajj, she gives up the love of her life, Quinlan Vos, who sheds a tear as he's laying her down in the waters and says, I will always love you. This was great stuff. I was in. I thought, wow, this is really going to be excellent. And then it just became same old, rinse and repeat with these characters. And I thought it really started off strong. And then we get another disposable Inquisitor, another let's trade a job for information that we need, another, in this case, likable, but still very derivative wannabe Padawan with Lyco. There was just nothing original. In fact, the way I would describe the whole thing is...
How predictable.
That's good. That's good. The story begins clearly following the events of the novel Dark Disciple, which probably has a lot of people scratching their heads who haven't read the book, and they're watching this going, well, how did Asajj die? And why is Quinlan Vos and Obi-Wan with her? Well, she dies as a result of what happens in Dark Disciple. Dooku is hitting Quinlan Vos with Sith lightning, and she pretty much jumps in between Voss and Dooku, and she soaks up the Sith lightning. It's a big blast, and that kills her. So that's a significant moment for her because she is basically sacrificing herself for Quinlan, who she definitely had a thing for. I think the series would have been better served telling that story as opposed to this crazy idea of resurrecting Asajj Ventress. To what end? Why is it necessary to resurrect Asajj Ventress? I mean, sure, you could even just blow off the Dark Disciple book and pretend like she was never dead. Who's going to know? What, a bunch of nerdy book readers are going to complain? Go complain to your library cops. No, listen, I don't mean to be insulting. I read all those books too, and I have been since Splinter of the Mind's Eye, so I'm not being judgy. I'm just being
But they have their place. They have their place, and you cannot put them in at the same level of importance as a live action series or an animated series that many, many more people are consuming and watching than are reading the books.
I agree.
Period.
I agree. I think it's kind of silly to give this much importance to novels and comic books. I'm sorry, I do. And also, I don't think there should be any crossbreeding between animation and live action outside of taking a character here or there. Continuing storylines from animation in live action it's goofy. It's goofy. But I digress. Back to this. So now we have a story going from animation, from one animated series of Clone Wars to a book called Dark Disciple to, years later, a sequel to Dark Disciple essentially happening back in animation in an entirely different series. But why? I feel like Luthen. What's the end game? I want to know the end game. Why bring Asajj? Is she that important of a character to the Star Wars franchise where she can't be dead? This isn't Darth Maul. This isn't Boba Fett. This is Asajj Ventress. Those guys are definitely on a level way higher than her. And it was almost necessary to bring those guys back. Boba Fett for his own show. Darth Maul, well, he's going to be getting his own show too. But it was George Lucas who made that call.
Yeah.
To bring back Darth Maul. And what is the importance of bringing Asajj back? Maybe she is going to be a key character in the Darth Maul animated series. She's going to have to be. It can't be just to justify her cameo appearance in The Bad Batch, which was also nonsensical.
Right.
What's the point? Why bring this character back? Most fans didn't even know she was killed off to begin with, like I said, because way more people watch these animated shows than read the novels, and that's just a fact. That's a fact.
The only way this makes sense, yes, if she shows up and Lyko shows up in this Darth Maul series, would be if this was a pilot, if they were just testing the waters to see, does this story have legs? How do the fans receive it? And maybe you'll get some sort of continuing adventures of Lyko and Asajj, because that was another head scratcher, is why introduce another former Jedi Padawan who's going off into the universe with an anti-hero. We got another anti-hero. That's the other thing. I think Star Wars is getting way too hooked on these anti-heroes because we don't like true blue heroes anymore. They all got to have edge. They all got to be, I don't know, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? I don't know. He's kind of both. And I want to bring back heroes. But by the way, I missed one thing when I was talking about my same old. Also, how many times have we seen the misunderstanding between the humans and the native creatures in a Clone Wars episode or in a Rebels episode? And it's all a big misunderstanding. I'll tell you some things I did like, though. There are some things I liked about it. Something we don't see a lot of, Jim. We did see it very briefly in an episode of The Mandalorian, the one with Christopher Lloyd, where he played a former separatist, we don't get a lot of separatist point of view post Clone Wars. So seeing this aged separatist who's sitting there thinking he was on the right side, because from a certain point of view, he was, the Republic was turning into something that was not good. And the idea of wanting to secede from that before it got too bad. Yeah, from a certain point of view, he was right. And I mean, Asajj says, well, we were both wrong. But in a way, you were also both right. So I liked the aging separatist guy, just to get that point of view. I also liked that this wasn't just backfill for the character. In other words, it'd be one thing if we knew that Asajj died in this particular story, but we're going to go back 2 years and tell you this story. Star Wars is always doing this backfill. Andor is backfill, but it's a very expansive story. It's not just for the sake of one character. It's telling a very, very big story. So at least it's pushing the character forward into new territory for her, where we don't know how it ends. But beyond that, I don't have much else that I really, really liked. I enjoyed it. It was fun for a Sunday morning to get some new Star Wars. But like you, when it was over, I was like, why was this necessary? Who asked for this?
Mm-hmm. And then we get some characters back, Highsinger and Latz Ratsy from the Clone Wars. Those are some Dave Filoni favorites. So, a lot of these things, they're kind of self-indulgence, exercises in self-indulgence for Dave Filoni, where it almost seems like he wants to see the characters again. He wants to have recording sessions with the actors again who play these characters. It's just something to keep him grounded in his animation background as his live action career is starting to take off more and more. So to me, it comes off as kind of self-indulgent in a way.
I could definitely see
Latz,
that.
Highsinger, Asajj, these are all Filoni favorites. And so it's almost like he's just trying to figure out any way to add new life to these characters. So the thing with Highsinger and Latz, and they go on that side quest to steal equipment from the Imperial shipyard. They infiltrate one of those giant spheres you see on the top of the Star Destroyer bridge. Those big spheres that are up there.
Right.
That's what those things were that they were messing around in. So I did some research. I was like, what is the purpose of those spheres up there anyway? I always thought that was like the shield for the bridge and everything. Like that was a shield generator. But I looked it up finally after all these years. And let me blow you away with this tech talk.
All right.
The two spheres on top of a Star Destroyer bridge are called sensor globes. They contain hyperwave transceiver coils and long-range scanners as part of the ship's ComScan system. The globes help the Star Destroyer with scanning, communications, and targeting. I thought the purpose of those spheres on top of the Star Destroyer bridge was to show the galaxy that those ships have a set of big balls. But no, they actually do serve a purpose. They are sensor globes.
Oh, my.
So just in case anybody was ever wondering, I mean, everything has been defined in Star Wars at this point. So you can look at any little knick-knack on the screen, guaranteed, if you dig around online, you'll find a definition for what that little knick-knack is.
Yes.
And that's the rabbit hole I went down, sensor globes.
Yeah, I do get the sense that there is a type of fan out there that just has to have everything explained. Everything explained. They just can't.
Well, I got to tell you, it was the late 80s, maybe early 90s, and I stumbled across this book, the Star Trek Technical Manual. And I looked at that book and I'm flipping through it. It's got all these cross sections and explanations for how the warp coils on the Starship Enterprise work and all this stuff, what these buttons mean that they're pressing. And I'm flipping through it going, why is there not something like this for Star Wars? And now we got it. Now we got it.
We've got it in Droves.
We got sensor globes, baby. Sensor globes. But so throughout this adventure, though, it's like, Asajj makes it clear she is looking for Quinlan. But at the end, when she finally has the opportunity to go on the path and potentially reunite with Quinlan, she says no. Does she say that because if she does chase her heart's desire, then she will become green mist and find herself in the afterlife? Is that part of the deal she makes with Mother Talzin?
Well, I don't think we know what the consequence is, other than the deal is stay dead in this realm or return at the cost of your heart's desire.
At the cost of your heart's desire. So maybe he turns into mist if she tries to get him back. Oh.
And the reason that Talzin is even able to offer this to Asajj is because his words of "I will always love you," sung by the great Whitney Houston, were
I knew that was coming.
were a gift. Talzin calls those words a gift. But there's always a catch. There's always some strings attached. So it's unclear what the consequences would be if she sought him out and tried to reunite with him. What's more curious to me is why Lyko decides that he'd rather be gallivanting around the galaxy with an aging Sith witch / bounty hunter.
That makes no sense.
Than getting on the path.
Right.
By the way, is the path, do you get reunited with other Jedi, or do you just get assigned a new identity and you're off on your own? Like the Witness Protection Program.
Right. Or the Underground Railroad. That's a good question, man. I just like the tie into the Kenobi series.
Yes,
Quinlan,
I do too.
Establishing the path and all of that. It's a callback to the Kenobi series. I think it's primarily just so the Jedi can escape the Empire and get to safety.
Yeah.
I don't know about, them giving you fresh identities and everything, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is part of the whole routine.
Like, do they all end up in the same condominium development somewhere? Retired
Luthen
Jedi?
Safe House. Luthen Safe House. They all just cram into there, All right, you take the bed tonight. I'll take the sofa. All right, we got 30 other people in here. Where are they going to sleep?
None of it made a whole lot of sense.
Or you know what? The one thing that did it. Number one, they're attempting to get away, and the Inquisitor of the Week shows up. Oh. I am so sick of this never-ending supply of Inquisitors who, they present nothing to the story except they're dark side users that we know will be getting killed by anyone with even the smallest smidgen of force power.
No matter how badass they're drawn, they're designed really, really cool. Like that guy,
right?
When we saw the trailer, I thought, oh, maybe this is, some ancient Sith that we've never heard of coming back or something like that. No, I saw the lightsaber. No, it's the helicopter blade, so it's an Inquisitor.
They're like mosquitoes, these things. Who was this one? The 10,000th brother? Is that his name? Come on. This is starting to get a little played out. And it also, in my opinion, is starting to show a lack of creativity. You got to create better conflicts for these characters and better threats to them via antagonists that have substance. And not just whip up Filoni scribbles down a drawing of a Sith Lord on a plane flight, and the next thing you know, it's pinata practice for Asajj. I don't know. It's just I want a little more substance with my Star Wars, and the Inquisitors are really beginning to lose any sense of integrity as far as the storytelling aspect goes. They're just tools. They're total tools, and that's all they are. But here's the thing that drove me crazy. The whole idea of this water, the water on this planet, this knockoff Tatooine planet they're on, They drive to the watering hole and start filling up these containers with water. Then these raiders appear and they start shooting at these guys because they're stealing the water. But they chase after them and attempt to take the water from them, getting injured along the way, possibly dying, when they left behind the whole flippin' watering hole. What do they need that water for? They got the whole watering hole back there.
They left a lake. There's
to go chase these guys. They want the water. Well, what are they coming after us for? And then it gets even more absurd when Lyko reveals that he understands he's never been on this planet before, but he understands the language of these warriors, these nomads, these raiders. He understands their language. Why? Because he's a Jedi. So along with force ability to levitate things, read people's minds, see into the future, you also have the ability to understand 6 million forms of communication? Since when? Since when? Did Yoda ever say to Luke, strong you will be in the Force, many languages you will speak, naturally, without any study? Come on. Why do you understand their language? Because I'm a Jedi. I did like that the head raider made a clicking noise like Boss Nass while he was thinking. He did that. I enjoy that.
Yeah, that was good.
It was a real nonsensical story. And I think that they can do a lot better. And I still want to know why Asajj? What's the point of this now? What's the point? Is she really that popular of a character? The only one I knew who liked her was Sonny from New Orleans. And he was thinking, kind of nasty thoughts about her. So I don't know. You go, Lucasfilm, you go, Filoni. But I'd like to go to the next story, which featured the origin of Cad Bane.
Yeah. So, I thought this was cool. My only problem with it, Cad Bane's just cool. I got to tell you, I'm a bit of a mark for Cad Bane. I do love him. But the problem with this is, though it was not a familiar Star Wars story, it was a very familiar archetypal story for me. It goes back to a movie probably not a lot of our listeners have seen, but Angels with Dirty Faces with Jimmy Cagney and Pat O'Brien. It's the story of two street toughs that grow up together like brothers, and one goes to the clink and ends up a lifelong criminal, and the other becomes a priest. And they finally meet up many years later, and they're still buddies, but you just have to see the movie the way it goes. There's also an episode of Batman the Animated Series, one of my all-time favorites, called It's Never Too Late. And it's the exact same story, but in this case, they're actual brothers. One grows up to be a gangster, and the other grows up to be a priest. In this case, you got these two. You've got Cad, and you have Nero, and they both grow up as kind of street toughs kids, and one becomes a lifelong gangster, bounty hunter, criminal, and the other becomes a lawman. So it was very much like the Asajj Ventress story. It was very predictable to me, but the Aaron character was a twist. And the Isaac character was a twist. So the fact that it paid off with this nice little twist, even though I did see it coming maybe a little earlier than I would have liked, I still really got to give them credit for the fact that they took what I thought was a very well retold story, recycled story, but they gave it a really cool twist. So I give this one 2 thumbs up. I really enjoyed it. I thought that in some ways it added to Cad Bane's character, but in other ways it doesn't. He's still the hard guy, nothing. And I kind of like it that way. I don't want to see a Cad Bane getting overly sentimental at the idea of him having a child. Or I certainly didn't want him to see, well, come with me, little boy. You know, and then he's going to go and raise this kid. Like, I didn't want that either. I thought that the way they ended it was great. He just walked away.
Yeah.
He walked away.
Cold. Got the ice cubes running through his veins because he knew exactly what was up with that kid. Cad knew. Cad knew that was his child.
At the end, he sure did. At the very end, he knew.
And he was fine with turning his back on that.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't seeking his family. Well, I should say that because the first thing he asked when he arrived on the planet is, where's Aaron?
Where's Aaron?
And they say, where's Aaron? What's the situation? And so they take, they tell Cad straight out, you know, I mean, they don't pussyfoot around the truth at all. And they say she married Nero. And then when Cad confronts Nero, he says Aaron is dead. Was she really dead, or was she just being hidden? I think she was really dead, right?
She was really dead, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I got the sense that maybe, I don't know, maybe she died in childbirth or soon thereafter. They don't say that, but that was just sort of my own story I was telling myself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really enjoyed this story. I enjoyed the different characters. I enjoyed Laszlo. Laszlo sort of represented the guy who kind of mentored the young Indiana Jones when he was known as River Phoenix. And he, you know, like River, he would emulate this guy that he observed. And kind of, there was a little hero worship there.
For sure.
That too. And I definitely believe that Cad looked up to Laszlo. Laszlo became family to him. He says even at the end of the first episode after Colby gets, he's known as Colby then too, changed his name from Colby to Cad, but he gets Nero's share and the guy says, welcome to the family. And that's like, you know, a very legitimate thing to say because then in the next episode we see Colby/Cad is now a teen, and he's very much a member of this crime family. It appears that Laszlo is really like raised him as one of his own. And Cad seems devastated when Laszlo doesn't return from that mission he was going on or whatever underhanded things Laszlo was up to. But he comes back, finds out, you know, he was killed by a cop on the planet that's, they never identify those planets either.
No,
not at all.
That's so annoying because in the live action shows, they'll give you a little, you know, a lot of times, not every time, but they'll give you a little title card and tell you the planet. Never in animation does this happen.
No.
Makes me crazy.
They could have given you a little bit of dialogue identifying the planet. Cad's return to wherever, you know? I mean, it's just nothing. So I was like, is this the planet Duros? Is this the home planet? Where are we?
I wondered that too, because there were a lot of Duros on the planet, but it wasn't exclusively Duros.
No, there were other aliens and humans. So, I mean, it's just hard to figure out. But I wish they gave us some of that, just so we had information. But again, I probably have to wait for a book or some Wikipedia nonsense. I don't know. But you know, that moment when Cad took Laszlo's hat and put it on, it reminded me very much of when that guy gave River Phoenix the hat in the Indiana Jones film, and it was obvious that the adult Indiana Jones had modeled his vibe and look after this guy that River Phoenix saw as a kid. So
Laszlo had the hat, he had the duster, he had the toothpick. So and if you look at Cad, Colby, and Nero, they definitely mirror each other, and in the way that Cad finds Laszlo, Nero finds the marshal and then becomes the deputy. And so very, very parallel. Jim, before this, had you ever seen either of these stories I was talking about before? Or had you ever seen this story sort of told in another way where you've got the two kids, they're very close, they end up on opposite sides of the law, other than Johnny Dangerously, by the way, which I know you're, like me, you're a fan of. Now, that's two brothers that end up on
Yeah, it is. It is one of those tales that ring familiar. I'm not going to be able to pull a 1938 film like Angels of Dirty Faces out of my butt like you did. But
I'm a Cagney fan. I love Jimmy Cagney.
There's just something about it that does, ring familiar with me. I don't have any particular examples to offer. But there was a certain richness to this arc that I think was not necessarily noticeable in the first arc with Asajj. Maybe it was just the way that this was a more linear story told, with a very solid beginning, middle, and end. That it just kind of sat better with me. I felt more fulfilled as an audience member who was consuming a story. So I think this is definitely the superior of the two arcs that we get presented with in this episode. And I've always liked Cad Bane a lot. And it's always been kind of a mystery about where he came from and how he became the guy he is. And I was pretty satisfied with the whole origin story and everything. And just the sympathy that you might have for Cad, knowing that his entire existence was rather predetermined, once he got separated from Nero and ended up with the crime family. It was like that was the only path made available to him.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Nero, he got arrested and Cad got away. So they must have put Nero through some real rehabilitation as part of their process.
Yeah.
Taking
it makes you wonder, though, had the roles been reversed, had Cad been the one that went to jail and Nero been the one that got away, it's kind of an interesting what if. Was their makeup so different or so similar that they would have actually had the same results, where it would have been Nero as the criminal and it would have been Cad? I don't know. I think a lot of that's baked into him. I the whole nature and nurture and all of that, but I feel like I like the way you describe it. He's got ice running through his veins. Even when they were little kids, it feels like Cad was maybe just slightly more encouraging of some of their antics than Nero was. But I don't know. I don't know if maybe the story is meant to make you ask the question of, wow, was it just luck that Nero ended up the one that got pinched and Cad got away, or was it?
I'm not sure, but I can say that the only time we really get any insight into the personality of the two boys is when they're eating the crunchies together.
Yeah, the crunchies.
And Cad says, "Oh, just like Mom used to make." And then all of a sudden, Nero becomes a little interested, or maybe sentimental or nostalgic. Say, well, what do you remember about your mom? He said, my parents, I don't remember anything about. I don't spend any time thinking about them. I barely knew him, is what Cad says. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if Nero had a stronger connection to his family that he's estranged from for whatever reason. Maybe they're dead or who knows. But he's clearly an orphan on the streets with Cad, and the two of them seem to be, two peas in a pod, really, until that one moment when, Nero seems to be interested in talking about maybe previous lives with families or whatever. And Cad just, I don't think about it. I barely know him. He doesn't care. So that's the only time I can ever, in the whole story, where I ever see any place to kind of determine differences between the two boys. They seem very much like, carbon copies of each other.
Right, except for that one moment, yeah.
Yeah, that one moment's the only time. And it's just kind of like a moment you can say it could be thrown away or whatever, but it's there. Yeah. And it's really the only time where things slow down enough where you see the boys interact and get a kind of feel for their individual vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I guess Green Duros can't have blue Duros children. Because the clue that Isaac was Cad's was because they both have blue faces.
Was Aaron was she blue or green?
Aaron was green. I think yellow and blue.
So how
green?
does that,
I don't know.
Yeah, she was green and he was.
But I think I'm just saying that was the visual cue that they gave. I think for Isaac. I mean, how late into the story were you when you realized, or was it at the very end? Had you considered that Isaac was Cad's?
I think it was at the very end.
Was it really?
Yeah, I was more concerned with how Cad was going to react to Nero shacking up with his old lady, Aaron, while he was gone. Oh, this is great. My best friend has me arrested, and then he shacks up with my girl while I'm away on some other planet, rotting away in a cell.
Right.
So that's the thing I was really concerned with more than the blue kid.
Yeah.
But then at the end, it was just like, oh, he says, you took everything away from me. He goes, not everything. And then, but there's no glances shared between Isaac and Cad. There's none of that sappy stuff. He doesn't push him toward Cad or anything, and with his last dying effort. Not everything. He just pushes the kid at Cad. What's this?
Well, I will say that after it was over, I was thinking, is there a story to tell about Isaac, grown up Isaac, looking for revenge on the man that killed his father? Now, if Cad really wanted to be a bad dude, he'd have looked at that little boy and said, I am your father.
Well, I don't think Cad wanted to take responsibility for that at all in that moment.
He certainly didn't want the child payments, Well,
just anything to do with the kid. I love what you're saying, though. What if the kid grows up and seeks revenge on Cad Bane for killing Nero without even knowing that Cad is actually his father? That would be very interesting, That could create. Now that's an end game. I like that. I can't figure out why Asajj Ventress is back, and now you teamed her up with this weird teenage kid, Lyko, who can, he's fluent in every language because he's a Jedi. That's a Force ability I never saw coming. Yeah.
Better get the reference manual out for that one.
Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why Obi-Wan could do such a good crate dragon sound,
Oh, yeah. He's actually just speaking crate dragon.
Yeah, right. He's speaking.
He's not just bellowing,
language.
some big growl or howl or whatever it is now.
He's the Dr. Doolittle of Star Wars, literally.
All right, well, that's going to wrap things up for us here this week on Rebel Force Radio. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us and listening. We appreciate that. If you need more RFR in your life, there's a couple of appearances coming up. You can see us in the flesh at the Forest Moon Festival coming up at the end of this month, May 30th through June 1st. Get those details at forestmoonfestival.org. This is a weird one because I can't really give you a location because it's literally multiple locations. So just go to forestmoonfestival.org and all the details are there. One location we can definitely tell you is our appearance in September 6th, RFR Live at Rancho Obi-Wan. Tickets going on sale later this summer. And remember, Patreon supporters get first dibs on the tickets, and we don't know. We can't be sure, but it's looking like they might go, all the tickets might go to Patreon supporters. So now's the time. Get in while you can. Patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio. In addition to those advanced ticket sales, the pre-sale there, you can also get the weekly full show video. So the show that you're listening to right now, this very podcast, you can watch in full show video Also, exclusive podcasts that you can't get. You can't get them on YouTube. You can't get them on Spotify. You can't get them on Apple Podcasts. You won't find them anywhere except on the Rebel Force Radio Patreon page. And we've talked about the great community over the years. It's a fantastic group of Star Wars fans, and so many of them you hear from on the RFR after shows because we prioritize calls from our Patreon supporters. So check it out. Buck gets you in the door, a buck in your listening. Patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio. Speaking of YouTube, we will be back streaming live next week for the final Andor after show, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So please check us out on YouTube. Subscribe. You'll get those notifications. Like the videos. It really means a lot to us, helps us out. Follow us on our socials, on Facebook, on X, on Instagram. And your source for all things and everything Rebel Force Radio is the official website, rebelforceradio.com. So keep listening. That's the number one thing. Just keep spreading the word, the gospel of Rebel Force Radio, for the Star Wars fan in your life that hasn't heard of Rebel Force Radio. They are out there. They are out there. So maybe you work with one. Maybe you know one. So please spread the word. Tell them about Rebel Force Radio. And if your podcatcher of choice allows you to do so, we'd love to have a review. They help us out a lot. We just have one very simple rule, please.
Make them good.
So remember, next week, Rebel Force Radio, the weekly podcast, will not be happening. Will not be happening. Instead, just the Andor after show, because I'm predicting it's going to be a doozy. We're going to have 3 new episodes, plus we're probably going to have to talk about some of the previous episodes that we saw, because it's all coming to an end, and we'll be getting resolution to a lot of things. So it's going to be a long one. So prepare yourself. So we'll see you next time for Rebel Force Radio. I'm Jason.
I'm Jimmy Mack.
And remember,
The Force will be with you, always.
Strong you will be in the Force. Many languages you will speak.